our webinar today. We have our largest webinar so far, not just this year, but for last year as well. So welcome to everybody that's joining us today. A pleasure to have you with us. We're going to run a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So if you have any questions, please use the chat channel to put your questions in as we go along through the webinar today. And I'll be summarizing those at the end so that you can have an opportunity to either pose your question directly, which you're very welcome to do when we switch on audio, or via myself if you prefer to do so. So thanks very much for joining us. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our company before we get started, if I may. We are a biomedical company, originally out of Portugal, but also now based in the UK with operations in the USA as well. And we're reaching out across Europe with our sales and marketing activity and the Far East as well. Our mission really, as you can see, is to really help people with their lives, to empower them to make the most of their situation, and likewise, as you can identify, to help them walk faster. And we're going to be talking a lot about K levels today, which is very relevant to the US market. But our ambition is really to ensure that people have a perfectly fitting prosthesis to add to their quality of life, so they can pursue their activities of daily living. So there are a lot of socket fitting challenges, as I'm sure many of you in our audience will be aware. There are challenges for the patient as well as for the prosthetist and the technician. A lot of people will be feeling pain from their prosthesis, and likewise, when there's pain, there's also return visits to clinics, which of course in some cases will also cause financial pain, because many returning visits means that people will be perhaps, if they're charging in a commercial environment, over servicing where it's not necessary in terms of socket fit and comfort. So we are very, very keen to make sure that we optimize the experience for the clinician and for the patient, so that people can go about their lives and not worry about their prosthesis anymore. So each patient has their own challenge. As you all know, some of them will have diabetes, some of them will have CVD, and of course, no patient is the same. Their limb is going to be unique, and of course, they all deserve to have a perfectly fitting prosthesis, which is, of course, what the focus of our technology is. And of course, there's a lot of older technology out there. Previous scanning technologies have been around for many years. There are body scanners that are helping to support people with limb shape. Being able to actually capture the inside of the socket is really something that we innovate with as a company, and we'll talk about that in more detail when we run through the demonstration. But really, what's important, of course, is the data that we're providing. You know, we're all familiar now with the way that the world is operating around data. We have some very unique takes on the way that we're collecting data and how that data is visualized, and how you can see in real time the interaction between the socket and the patient's residual limb, which of course is very important. So we've got a number of elements that we're addressing. You can see here that there are many amputees that are growing in because of the health crisis that we're experiencing with obesity and other factors. A lot of people are experiencing pain with their sockets. Insurance companies in commercial markets are very keen to ensure that they are seeing a return on investment for the work that they're putting out. And likewise, there's a lot of pressure on budgets. So really what we're looking to do is to optimize the fitting process. And we'll talk today about the components of the Insight system. So the system is made up of a 3D scanner, which, as we mentioned earlier, identifies the inner dimensions of the socket. The biosensor, which identifies the pressure that is exerted around that socket. The wearable, which the sensors are communicating with, which then communicates with the app. And the app is a very important part of the overall process, which is where we're going to be recording patient data, but also the real-time interaction between the socket and the patient. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our CEO, Fred Carpentiero, who is going to run a demonstration for us today. Hey, Fred.
Hi, Phil.
Great. So Fred, are you ready to take over?
Yes, let me change for the video of the demo first of all. And thanks everyone that has joined us so far. Let's hope we can clarify all your questions, and in the end we'll for sure have time to answer anything that wasn't clear during the presentation. So hope you can see the video right now.
We can see your screen, Fred.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you here a patient with a transtibial amputation of the right leg. This specific patient prefers a loose fitting and has some issues with this prosthetic because of that. So the first step is to prepare the socket for scanning. You start by cleaning it and then putting on the sensors that you wish in the zones that you wish to evaluate. In this case, you are going to use 4 strips on the lateral and anterior and posterior sides of the socket. You then place the socket with the strips inside the scanner. For that, you have to start by opening the self-centering grip, place the socket, and then you close the grip until it stops because it will stop once the socket is in the right position. Close the door, and you move to the iPad to start controlling the entire system. So here we already have the patient created. So you start by adding a new appointment and selecting the type of amputation. Once you have that, you press the scanning button, you select the scanner from your network and press connect, and the scanning starts. While you're waiting for the scanner, you can fulfill information of the patient, like the range of motion. This is all very easy to do. All the commands are iOS based and are native, so very simple, very intuitive. You can also add on patient information such as the weight and the height. And you can also add some notes if you want. All of this will be important because in the end, as we'll show you when you generate the report, all this information will be compiled into a PDF report. You also have the possibility of adding some pictures from the residual limb or from the socket itself. So the scanning takes, the physical scanning takes less than 90 seconds. And now as that part is finished, you can now remove the socket from the scanner. And then you have to wait about 90 seconds more to get the digital version of the socket. So this is the result of the scan. You can see the 3D shape of the inner part of the socket and all the different sensors that were identified in the socket in that model. You can move the 3D model around and have different views. You can then use the ruler function to measure the perimeter at different heights. And once you're happy with that, you can then move into the pressure acquisition part. So you get the socket out of the scanner with the sensors. You get it into the prosthetic, get it assembled. And you get the patient to wear his prosthetic with the sensors in. This works with all types of suspensions and different systems of prosthetic sockets. You have to put the main unit of the wearable around the socket and the smaller unit of the wearable, in this case around the thigh, it's a transtibial, and then you connect the sensors into the main unit of the wearable. If it was a transfemoral, the main unit would also go on the socket and the smaller unit in this case would go on the pylon below the knee. You then turn on both units, connect to them on the wearable, and you'll get immediately the pressure information on the 3D model. So here we can see that as we do static acquisition, we can see that as the patient shifts his weight from one side to the other, you can clearly see where all the pressure is being supported. So here we start by doing a first analysis with the system where we know that the socket is loose and the alignment is not good. And you can clearly see that by the pressure points on the anterior and posterior faces of the socket, where you always have that red area where you never stop having pressure, because that's where all the support is. And you can see that you don't have that even distribution around the socket because of that loose fitting, especially on the lateral side and medial side. After that, we made some rectifications to the alignment, and you can now see that the pressure is much more distributed throughout the height of the prosthetic, both on the anterior and posterior sides. So here we are recording, and you just saw the warning saying sufficient data gathered. This means that now you can have enough data to process and get the average pressures, as we are going to show you further ahead on the demo. So as the patient had a loose fit, we had asked him to add on a 3-ply sock and test it again. And now you can see that pressure, especially on the loading response, is much more spread out through in the entire socket with that total contact fit that was intended. So in this particular patient, the patient prefers a loose fit, but actually, and he was very resistant to having a tighter fit. But once he actually saw the result of adding a sock with our system, he asked the technician if we could take the sock home and try it for some walks, because clearly he saw the value of it. So as I said, once you do a 2-minute acquisition, you have the process results where you can see the average pressure for each gait phase, or condense all of these averages into the average stride. And this allows you to see how good the fitting is in this particular socket. If you want, you can have then the full unprocessed results that you recorded, where you will see the pressure changing with an animation of the amputee walking on the right side. The arrow means the amputee is turning, and now you can see it's moving, and one thing is synchronized with the other. You can easily export the STL 3D model to your email by pressing the export button. And as I said, generate PDF reports. In this report, you have the patient information on top. You have the different views for all the different for the averages on all the gait phases. And in the bottom, you would have notes and pictures as well. We move back to the presentation, and that's it in terms of our product. So it's really easy to use, really intuitive, and it allows you to see if the fitting for that particular patient is good or not, and what modifications you need to do, and test them before you send the patient home, waiting for him to be able to give you feedback. So here, another example that I can show you is this is from a transfemoral patient with an adjustable socket. And on the left side, you have before the adjustments, and on the right side, you have the after. So you can clearly see that as you were able to see where the pressure was not being applied, we tightened the adjustable socket, and you can see how that pressure started to smooth out through the entire socket. Here on the pre-swing is very clear. You had several areas with a lot of pressure and other areas with no pressure at all. And once we've made the adjustments, you can now see that the pressure is much better distributed throughout the socket. The same thing on the loading response. Obviously, on this particular socket we were using, there were some rigid parts that you could not get them to contact with the residual limb, and that's why you have several points that never get any pressure. But you can clearly see how by being able to see the pressure you're doing, you can adjust very quickly the socket to get a better fit that you are looking for. So the main benefits of using our system is that it requires less time from the prosthetists, and this is very important for the O&P clinics, because this allows you to free up more time and resources to see other patients. It also gives you objective data to submit claims to the payer. It's a good tool to train younger prosthetists as well. It gives you access to a medical history of each patient. You can keep a digital record of all the sockets you've done for that patient and all the acquisitions. It's a more efficient and cost-effective workflow in the end. So you can, and in terms of the scanner itself, you can also use it to duplicate existing sockets in a very easy way. For the clinicians, once again, you can access precise objective data that will allow you to pinpoint problems faster. You don't need to fully rely on the feedback from the patients, that sometimes is very hard. You can show and see visually the differences either caused by the socket fitting or by the alignment. And once again, have the entire history of the patient. That will be good to add on context, especially if you have different prosthetists dealing with the same patient. For the patients, what we've seen is a huge change in their engagement in the process, because they feel much more involved and they can understand the concepts way better than before and can actually communicate better with their prosthetists. So the things where we've seen most impact from Insight is to get a more accurate feedback about the socket fit, when especially in new patients or patients that don't have full sensation of the limb, to provide a visual representation of the pressures inside the socket, a very easy and good way of pinpointing the locations of the socket that need rectification. A good way to create, it has improved a lot the communication between the prosthetist and the patient, and it provides a good solution for fast duplication of existing sockets. Just to give you some real examples now, here we have a study case. We have been doing a couple of them in the US with POA in Middletown, and we can share them with you after our webinar. But this case is particularly interesting with Leslie. This is an amputee that has the prosthetic for over 24 years, so a very experienced amputee that has been using the prosthetic device for a lot of time. And his employment is as delivery driver. So he spends a lot of time driving and on his feet. And adding on to that, he has a plastic artery on his residual limb, so he cannot receive any pressure on that. So the problem we identified very quickly with the system on that day was that the socket fitting was loose, which was causing pistoning and movement within the socket, leading to intermittent pressure on that plastic artery that would block the blood flow and made Leslie lose the sensation of his limb. And when the curious thing was that when he arrived to the center, he was saying, "I'm fine, I don't have any complaint. This is usual. I have to take out my prosthetic a couple of times a day, shake my limb and get it back on so I can regain sensibility." And once we showed them the analysis and we tested it with different levels of socks, and we increased the plies and really got that consistent fit throughout the socket, we completely eliminated the pistoning. We saw that the plastic artery had not any pressure in there, which led to a better blood flow. And that led eventually, once he left, to not having that redness on the skin and not losing the sensation of his limb. So even in this case that we have a very experienced amputee, he was having trouble managing the volume of his limb. And only when he was able to see this visual aid, he was able to finally make sense of the problems and the concepts that were being presented to him. We've also been working on outcome study in De La Torre O&P in Pittsburgh, but this study unfortunately has been stopped for the past year since the pandemic started, but these are the interim results we had at the time that we can share with you. So what we saw with the 6 patients that completed both the pre and post assessment was that we increased their functionality levels, their functionality in general, resulting in some of the cases even in an increase in their K-level score. And we increased for most of the patients the satisfaction. There is an outlier here with the patient 2 that was experimenting with the running blade, so the fit was not as good as with this normal prosthetic. Also, one other study that we've done was a clinical study here in Portugal. and where we saw that we reduced the fitting time, the socket fitting time in 64%, that the system was considered very user-friendly, and that it was able to identify the problematic areas in most of the cases. And also that it had a very good acceptance both from the prosthetist and from the amputee. One of the things we've been working on is that besides having the full system that allows you to do all the things that we've discussed so far, there will always be the scanner available as a standalone device. And this will be mainly focused, as I said, on replicating sockets. This will something that will be available soon, so we'll be keeping you updated as to the release date of this new feature. In terms of the model and the pricing of Insight, the way we are selling it at the moment is that we start by selling an initial package that has the entire hardware and software needed for the first year. And then after the first year, there is a cost for the consumables and an annual fee for the license and support. The consumables are the sensors that need to be replaced after a certain number of usages, but they can be used with several patients. And that's it. So we'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have at this moment.
That's great, Fred. Thank you so much for that. Well, we had some questions through on the chat channel, and as it says on the slide, please feel free to raise your hand or to pose your question via the chat. What I suggest we do now is perhaps if we just drop out of the slideshow, we can just go on to gallery view, and if you wish to actually pose your question directly to us, we'd be happy to do that as well on camera and audio. So let me just first ask you the first question, which came through from Chris Arthey, Fred, which is, are the pressure readings qualitative or quantitative? If quantitative, how much pressure is too much, i.e. kPa, which I believe is kilopascal measurement?
Yeah, so the way we are presenting the pressure is in a relative form. So the pressure you're seeing in colors is a percentage of the pressure inside the socket. So we are really focused here on the pressure distribution, not on the actual value of pressure, because it will depend on the type of tissues, on the weight of the patient, and a lot of other variables involved. So in this case, the idea is to be able to see if the socket is supporting pressure in the areas that it was designed to be. As we were seeing, if you have a total contact socket, you want to see that even pressure distribution. If you want to avoid certain areas because there are bony areas or have artificial arteries or any other type of problem that you have to relieve, you can also see that those areas are being relieved properly. So red doesn't mean it's bad. It means that it has more pressure compared to the other locations. And you have to see if the pressure is being applied in the areas that the socket was designed to receive that pressure.
Okay, Fred, and just another question from Chris. It says, it looks as if the pressure sensors are points on a strip. How complete are the pressure maps?
So the points that you see on the model is the center of the sensor. The actual cell is a bit wider. It has about about 2 centimeters, sorry. Of the diameter, and then they are spread out with some distance, but they are close enough so we can infer the pressure in the same strip between the different cells. And then in terms of number of strips, you can place as many as you want and in the locations that you want, because the scanner will detect them and will place them on the 3D model correctly.
Thank you, Fred. And another question from Andre Luz. It says, in the image you shown of the femoral image, did you have sensors in all of the interior or just the 4 strips, and the software calculates an estimate value?
So in the transfemoral one, we had I think 10 strips of sensors. So we had quite a lot of sensors when compared to the one we showed on the demo. So there was a full coverage. It was not an estimate value. It was the real values that were being gathered.
Okay, Fred, thank you. So that's the end of the questions that we've got through from the chat channel. So we will be able to make sure that everybody can can unmute themselves if they'd like to pose a question. So I've got another couple of questions that I'd like to ask you, Fred, but if you have a question today, please feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away. The whole point of this is to ensure that you get as much information as you need. So next question for you, Fred, is about the calibration of the sensors. How calibrated are they?
So the sensors are calibrated once we receive them, and they are calibrated on a bench press. So they are perfectly calibrated against each other and for the scale that we use.
Okay, and another sort of standard question that we get a lot in relation to the color mapping. So is red bad, or is red just an indicator of a certain level of pressure?
So it's just an indicator of where of the locations that have more pressure. So it's not bad. It depends on the type of socket that you are evaluating and how you designed it to be. Once again, we are really looking into the pressure distribution, not to specific values of pressure.
And a question to Andre again, which relates to another one I had for you, which was, he says, would you say that 10 sensors are enough to cover the residual limb with accurate information?
So what we've seen the most commonly being used is on transtibial sockets to use 4 strips, and on transfemoral sockets to use 8 strips. Besides the number of strips, you can also, we have also available 3 different sizes of strips. So there are strips with 4 cells, strips with 6 cells, and strips with 8 cells. And this is because of the length needed for the different types of sockets that exist, and depending on the size of the patient as well.
Okay, and another question from Tanya. What is the lifetime of the sensors, and how many recordings on average do they last for?
So they can be used up to 8. They can be used 8 times, 8 recordings.
Okay, and in terms then of the availability of replacement strips, what's the process there, Fred? Do people have to be in a position where they have a stock? I mean, what's the process for updating your strips?
Yeah, so usually we supply with the initial kit, we supply a full kit of 16 sensors for each of the sizes, which allows you to use it with a reasonable number of patients. Once the strips are getting to their maximum usage, you will get a warning both on the app and on the actual strip that will let you know that you need to replace that strip on next time. And that will also allow you to contact us and buy more if you're running out, if you're running low on stock on your strips.
Okay, and in terms of availability, Fred, a question that we've had a lot in the past, which is probably not so relevant anymore in terms of FDA approval and CE. We have an international audience today. So is product availability international now?
Yes, it is. Yeah, our product is both FDA approved and CE marked. So it has all the regulatory paths taken care of, so it can be acquired in any part.
Okay, great. Another question here from Miranda Chapman. She says, can you use other scanners or an existing STL file of the internal socket shape? That's the first question. And can you move the sensors to positions other than on the ML and AP planes? Can you scan clear diagnostic sockets? So that's 3 questions. So maybe I should just go back to the beginning. So the first one is, can you use other scanners or an existing STL file for the internal socket shape?
No, so it has to be our scanner because you need to detect how many sensors are on the socket and where they are located. So it doesn't work with other scanners.
Okay, and can you move the sensors to positions other than the ML and AP planes?
Yes, as long as they are kept vertically and you get the USB-C connectors out of the socket, you can place them in any position you want within the socket.
Okay, and then the last one is in relation to scanning clear diagnostic sockets.
Yes, so in clear diagnostic sockets, we usually spray the inside of the socket with a scanning spray, or you can tape it on the outside. So, but you can scan it. We have a series of indications that we provide on how to scan different materials if they are challenging materials like the clear sockets, for example.
Okay, excellent. So that is all the questions that we've now got, Fred, in the chat channel. So if anybody else has any further questions, please feel free to either unmute yourself and pose that question, or just pop it into the chat channel, or even raise your hand. So does anybody else have any further questions for us at all? Just while you're thinking about that, you can see that we've launched our poll. So we'd be interested to know how useful you found today's webinar. So obviously we like to ensure that we're improving our outreach as best as we can on a running basis. So please do feel free to let us have your thoughts on the poll. And can't see any more questions coming through. So I think that we probably would like to sort of wrap up, unless anybody else has any further questions. I mean, obviously our website has got a lot of information on it. We have a lot of videos as well as tutorials on our website, so please feel free to check that out. And we have, for our US audience, we have our distribution partner is Cascade. So if you have any questions about our product in the US market, please feel free to reach out to your Cascade rep. And otherwise, outside of the US, please feel free to contact us via our website. We'd be very keen to contact you as soon as we can to understand what any queries are that you may have. So a few people are filling out the poll, so thank you for doing that. And I can't see any more questions. Fred, is there anything else that, in terms of questions that you normally get that hasn't been asked today?
No, I think we've approached most of the main topics and the questions we usually see. But if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us by email or go to our website. We have a lot of materials on our website available, such as the technical specifications of our products. We have study cases. We have a lot of other materials that would be glad to share with you. So feel free to reach out, and someone will for sure get back to you and help you with any questions you might have.
Very good, thank you, Fred. So thank you to Chris, Andre, Tanya and Miranda for their questions today. Please do feel free to complete the poll before we wrap up today. Thanks very much for joining us. And as Fred and I have both said, please just check out our website, and we'll be very keen to help you with any questions that you may have. So, and don't forget, there's another webinar coming up next month in this series where we're going to be focusing on patient case studies. So you'll get a little bit more insight, both on the patient side as well as the prosthetist side. So one of our early adopter prosthetists who's been using the system will be presenting on that day. So please feel free to join us. We'll be letting you know on that via email. So great. Thanks very much for joining us today, everybody, and really appreciate your support. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining.